Welcome to Out of the Blank.
Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. We're with Max. Max, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Can you please introduce yourself to everyone out there listening?
Hi, Robbie. Great to be here. My name is Max Good, and I'm the director of the Assassination Mrs. Payne, which just came out a couple months ago. It's available on iTunes, Amazon, Vimeo, a bunch of different platforms. And it's about Ruth and Michael Payne and their intriguing connections to the JFK assassination. You can find more on my website, jfkpayne.com, or on Twitter and social media. My handle is jfkpayne. I'm on Twitter, pretty active on there.
So the part of the Kennedy assassination, I've been probably researching it for 2 months. It has consumed my life. I've lost a little bit of sleep and a little bit of hair, but it's okay.
Only
We're
2
still
months?
yeah, only 2 months. Mostly I'm trying to soak up what people have been cramming in for 10, 20, 30 years into a matter of an hour, 2 hour conversation. I think I'm soaking it up a little bit well. I'm pretty well informed, but one area that I'm missing out on is with the Paynes. So when you made this documentary, you could have made a documentary about anything about the Kennedy assassination. You could have made it about the motorcade. You could have made it about Secret Service. People have done it, but you never hurts to have more information out there. Why did you specifically choose the Paynes?
Well, I learned about the Paynes in Jim Douglas's book, JFK and the Unspeakable, which it might be the most popular JFK assassination book ever written. Definitely, within the last, 20 years, it's the biggest book. And he spent several pages on the Paynes, and I'd never heard of them before. I didn't know that there was this whole other aspect to the assassination, and that's kind of how it works with the assassination. That's why people can spend their whole life researching this, is because it goes in so many different tangents. But the Paynes are actually central characters. Ruth Paine was basically the number one witness for the Warren Commission. She answered over 5,000 questions, which was way more than anybody else. And the Marina Oswald, basically Ruth Paine was sort of a friend and benefactor to the Oswalds. She met them less than a year before the assassination, and befriended them, and then invited Marina to come live with her and sort of help them out, stored their belongings in her garage. Lee Harvey Oswald would stay at Ruth Paine's house on the weekends while Marina was living there. And he spent the night before the assassination at Ruth Paine's house and allegedly picked up his rifle from her garage. Also, Ruth Paine was instrumental in helping Oswald get his job at the Texas School Book Depository. And there's a lot of other stuff like that where Ruth Paine is right in the mix with the evidence against Oswald. So there are a lot of questions about her.
Where did they meet exactly? If it was like that, a year is a very short amount of. I wouldn't invite anybody over my house, even a friend, to sleep over the year. You could take a butter knife to my throat at any moment. Maybe it's just because I know people bring up the aspect that she was like a Quaker, which I don't necessarily know how far that is. It like the Amish? You can't use cell phones. I don't know. But it gets into an area like maybe she was more accepting, or maybe people bring up like the divorce that she went through or the separation, that maybe she just wanted someone to come live with her. And I get into this aspect, like, where do they meet? How does the relationship evolve that much? Because from what I've heard about Oswald, his description is like he's either like this person that doesn't talk too much, doesn't really eat anything, just drinks coffee, very, very silent, doesn't seem like he's interested in talking with anybody, but he's very interested, obviously, in talking with his wife, which just leaves this like character that's so puzzled where I'm sitting over here, I'm 24, he's 24. Somehow he's killed the president. That's what he's labeled with. And I'm like, damn it. Do I need to stab somebody and get my rep up or something?
Yeah, well, Oswald did a lot in his 24 years. He defected to, he was a Marine, he learned Russian, uh, he defected to the Soviet Union, he came back, he was, involved with the Fair Play for Cuba committee, you know, seemingly as he created his own chapter and was a president, and quite possibly he was doing intelligence work. And then he's accused of shooting at General Edwin Walker months before the assassination, and then he's accused of killing the president. He tries to, yeah, he supposedly goes to Mexico City and tries to, get a visa to go to Cuba or back to the Soviet Union, and yeah, so he did a lot in those 24 years, and people, the general public's um, impression of Oswald is sort of like, oh, he was a lone nut weirdo communist, and it's really not that simple. He also worked on a CIA U-2 spy plane base in Japan while he was a Marine. So uh, there's a lot to learn about Oswald.
So much of a communist that he's hanging out with like hardcore right wing people as well too, which makes it even more suspicious. But how does he have all this money if he's living in somebody's home? How does he able to take trips to Mexico? How is he able to take trips to Russia? How is he able to do so many different things where it seems like, if you're taking two shots at two people, one being the president, I mean, ammunition's money. I mean, there's a lot of stuff where it's like very, very complex for a person who's living out of someone else's home.
Yeah, there are questions about where Oswald got his money to travel, to buy his photographic equipment, and a lot of other stuff. But back to the question of how the Paynes met the Oswalds. It was at this party of a bunch of oil people in Dallas, and sort of there are white Russians. These are sort of czarist, uh, right wing Russians who were uh, against the communists, and there's sort of a community in Dallas of these people. And um, this guy named George de Mohrenschildt somehow became friends with the Oswalds, and he is the one who brings them to this party, and the Oswalds are introduced to the Paynes, and after that, the Paynes kind of become Oswald's main friends.
When it comes to okay, with the Paynes and Oswald and all them becoming friends, that were there any significant events before? Like, was it just us talking on a cell phone, late night calls to your friends for a couple hours a night or something? Or what did they have like events where they hung out publicly, privately? I mean, after a year, they got invited into, to go live with them. So I'm just curious to what were any significant, did she talk about any like, oh, well, we had this lunch date or we had this movie theater scenario. And then next thing you know, relationships evolved and they moved in.
Yeah, I think that's basically Ruth's story, is that she met Marina at this party, maybe met Lee for a little. I don't know if, yeah, maybe met Lee for a little bit, but uh, she mainly spent the time with Marina and made some connection with her. You know, felt like Marina needed help, and Ruth also had been studying the Russian language uh, since the late 50s, and so having a Russian to talk to was possibly an opportunity for her to advance her Russian skills.
How did she become so knowledgeable in Russian? Like that's a weird language to want to pick out, even if like, it's the Cold War or whatever you want to say. It's just an odd, very difficult. It's not easy. The lettering in that looks a lot like symbols.
Yeah, you have to learn a whole new alphabet. Um, and yeah, Ruth Paine, she was a Quaker. The Quakers, they're not like the Amish. They are, it's kind of a form of Christianity, and they are very much focused on peace. You'll find a lot of Quakers in the anti-war movement. They're big, the American Friends Service Committee, um, and they're generally known to be honest, uh, but there are, you know, I think there are some definitely Quakers who became wealthy, and you know, not not every Quaker is a saint or totally trustworthy. But yeah, Ruth started to learn Russian because she was involved with this East-West contacts committee for the Quakers, where they were doing pen pal correspondence with young Russians, Russian college students and young Americans, and trying to have some cultural exchange and maybe uh, you know ease the tensions of the Cold War. Have you know uh, some friendly contacts with Russians, and so that's why she got interested in learning Russian. Uh, but the program she was involved with did have they had contacts in the State Department, and it was mo- almost surely being monitored by the CIA, if not being used, possibly unwittingly, as a way to get information about what's going on in Russia. Uh, so
Did she
yeah,
ever
some people.
well, did she ever speak about like any conversations with Oswald? Because from what I've heard from like the documents that were released, they talk about Oswald, like the Russians knew he was like a spy. They knew all this type of stuff because his language speaking skills weren't that good. They were sloppy Russian. It wasn't good at all. And if Ruth Paine spoke Russian, I mean, you would think that if you were that interested in making sure your cover's not blown, you would ask Ruth, "Hey, can you teach me some Russian, or can you teach me any of this type of stuff?" I mean, did she have any conversations with him in that language, or was it just like, did she describe him as just being silent, never wanting to associate with her?
Yeah, they spoke in Russian, uh, I think most of the time. And she had some interactions with him. She's described them, and you know, sometimes her impression of him is negative. Sometimes it's sort of neutral. The story was he was really good with kids. He used to play with the children, and even like the neighborhood children would come over and play with Lee. And yeah, I mean, Ruth, she, I guess she was closer to Marina. So, and maybe she had some resentments against Lee. I don't know. Yeah.
Do you know about her tutoring a young Russian boy?
Yeah. So her only Russian student was a guy named William Hootkins, uh, who later became an actor. Interesting guy. He he was in Star Wars. He played one of the fighter pilots, Jack Porkins, I think it was, and but he was actually a really accomplished actor, and he he was a really smart guy. He went to Princeton or something, studied, I forget, astrophysics or something. He knew several languages, and he was a big theater actor, big stage actor. He's pretty sophisticated guy. Um, but there there's a guy, there's a JFK researcher named Greg Parker who has a theory that uh, Bill Hootkins was this boy who was reported to have been seen with Oswald going to the barber.
At a barber shop. Yeah, that's what I was hinting at. Yeah, Greg told me that, and I was just trying to confirm to see if that was true or not. I have no clue because I mean, much like you actually included this in your film as well too, is the Nicaragua thing. I mean, she talked about going to Nicaragua, taking photos, and it was for some newspaper or something like that. And then at the time that they went to go take photos of them back, because they were just taking, it was her and a friend, right? And they were, you might be able to explain it a little bit better than me. I might butcher it.
Yeah, well, you were asking, do we know if this is true? And that's the question. And some of this stuff, it's still speculation, and it's good to separate speculation from documented fact. I would consider it clearly speculation to say that this 14-year-old boy that was reported to have been seen, it was Bill Hootkins. I mean, it does make some sense, but we don't know for sure. And until some proof comes out, we don't know. Same with the Nicaragua stuff. We know the facts of that are that people suspected Ruth, and they reported that she was doing some suspicious things, taking notes about people, and some of her other peace activists who she was working with down in Nicaragua. They suspected that she was some government agent, but we don't have proof of that. It depends on which witnesses you believe. Who you believe, Ruth, or the people who say that she was doing all this stuff. It's different when you have an actual document, saying Ruth Paine's sister worked for the CIA. That's that's something real. You can't dispute that. So that kind of evidence is more important. Some of these other things, they might be convincing, and if taken all together, this circumstantial speculative stuff might create a case. But I think it's important for people to think about what's real evidence and what's speculation. And have when you hear something, when somebody tells you something about the JFK assassination, is it true? Did they give you the backup source, the documents, the statement? Because there's too many rumors flying around. Everybody's saying, oh, I heard this, I heard that, and I heard, when I first started working on this, I saw all this stuff online that said Ruth Paine's sister was CIA, her father was CIA. And people weren't providing the documents. They were just saying that because they heard it somewhere, they read it somewhere. And so, I found the document about her sister, and that's true. That's true. And Ruth herself, I don't know if she's ever really confirmed it, but she doesn't really deny it. When you hear her talk about her sister, it's very strange the way she words everything. But her father, we don't have proof that he worked for the CIA. You can assume he worked for USAID, and his reports were forwarded to the CIA, and he was recruited or considered for an assignment for the CIA in Vietnam. So you could say he's linked to the CIA, or there's some connection there, but you can't say he was CIA. I don't think that's appropriate.
Well, let me ask you a question, content creator to content creator. How difficult was it for you to be able to ask that question after you asked her and she gave you an answer, and then you pulled out a document saying this about the CIA and her sister working for the CIA? I mean, that's not an there's a fine line when we can talk about criticisms. For instance, people can criticize the things you don't ask. That's going to happen because you can't think of every possible perspective that's going to be out there. I get some too, but you get to a point where you end up becoming friends, especially when you're talking to Ruth Paine. You know, you're inviting someone to an interview, but there's also a wall that you hit when you start realizing, is this just a glorified interview piece where I'm just appraising somebody, or am I going to ask the questions that you know someone's going to want to hear? And that's when we get to the CIA document part. And that's an uncomfortable feeling, not just for her, it's uncomfortable for you too, because you just recorded however much of this content with this person. And you have to now explain to them that you have to ask these questions on a sense of, so it doesn't come off as you're just, doing an appraisal piece. It also needs to be what it's supposed to be, is a documentary about the whole Payne scenario. That means conspiracy, that means Warren Commission, that means everything included. Parts aside, you left it pretty open ended with everything. I mean, it's for the audience to make their own decision, which I think is a smart move. Um, Definitely when I know Joe McBride told me, he said to you about keeping the camera on their face just for a little bit to like kind of linger there for a second. And it does add more drama and kind of effect to the whole thing. But I mean, it's like I said, it's very hard. I think everyone out here kind of wants to know what your opinion is on it. I'm not going to ask you that, mostly because I think you leave it up to the director's take of letting people decipher it for themselves and make their own points of view, which just leads into better interaction and conversation around the whole incident. And then if you're really super interested, you just look it up for yourself. But back to the question, I ranted, I'm sorry. um, but when you, with the question you had to ask, I mean, was she, the whole leading up to that point where you started to ask kind of more of the hard hitting questions? I mean, it was going good, right? It was a good interview, you were having a great time getting to know her. Was it over a span of a couple of days, or did you have weeks?
So I interviewed her over the course of maybe 2 or 3 years. I did, um, I think, about four different interviews with her, um, and also just filmed her in her everyday life a little bit. Um, and yeah, I told her from the beginning that I wanted to address these accusations. I like that, to me, is one of the most interesting aspects of her story. Like, to pretend it doesn't exist, I think is dishonest. So I told her, I've been reading some of this stuff and I'd like to give you a chance to respond to it. Um, and so I kind of slowly ramped up to asking those extremely uncomfortable questions. And, you know, I thought maybe she was going to be really angry. Uh, she will walk off the set. She never did. I could tell she was a little annoyed at times, and but she's really strong. She barely ever shows any sign of anger, getting flustered. Um, and yeah, I told her at the end of that interview, that's their sort of final interview, one where she's in a blue turtleneck. I told her, like, thank you for your patience and in answering these questions, but I felt like I wouldn't be doing my job unless I put these questions to you. And that's kind of how I felt. Is this is historically important. This, and it goes beyond you know the desire not to offend somebody, or to get along, or to be quote unquote respectful. This is too important to sort of just ignore all these questions. I mean, these are real questions. They weren't, you know, they didn't just come up out of thin air. Nobody, people coming up with this stuff and writing these books, uh, aren't just like fly by night. conspiracy mongers. They're like serious researchers, and they have documents to back up a lot of their suspicions. So
Well, when you were making it, how did you go in, like, with your head? Like, what was your mindset at going into it? And did it end up the same on the way out? Like, I looked at when I first discovered about the Paynes, even that topic, someone mentioned it, and I ended up doing a little bit of research into it. Um, I was like, as much as I'm going into this, thinking that if it's a whether whoever killed the president, let's just say that, but if it's a 24-year-old that's getting blamed for something that he didn't do, that needs to be corrected, because I think as much as you can say about finding an answer to who killed the president, you also just blacklisted somebody in history. And that's when I kind of related the same with the Paynes. I go, imagine going this amount of time and people thinking that you had an involvement in your CIA and getting all these remarks on you. So I can understand the people that would defend her. But at the same time, I started to notice some things, not just, you didn't really say it in your documentary. I kind of just put this in myself. Was, I mean, she talked about it. She was open about it. She's done interviews before in the past. There's years and years of interviews about it. So it's not like she's shy. She's just kind of shy if it goes in a certain direction, which I can understand. But it is kind of like a popularity thing as well, too. I mean, people want to interview you. What was it like? What was all this type of stuff? As long as it stays in the ballpark of reasonable questions, and then you kind of float to the territory of I guess uncomfortable questions, which was interesting to me. Like, did you just send her an email and she responded back? Like, I feel like that would be something like very, very hesitant.
yeah. So yeah, she's actually been really open about doing interviews. I didn't realize that when I first set out to make this movie, but you'll see her in tons of network specials on the assassination, and she's talked to lots of researchers. Some of them on the conspiracy side. They will go visit her at her retirement home and interview her for their books.
Wait, does she have Spotify? Would she know what a podcast is? Because I'll invite her on here right now.
I she probably does. Yeah, you can get in touch with her. It's not that hard. So yeah, I mean, I sent her an email, and she was open. I was a I was a grad student at the time. I was studying documentary, and that maybe helped. She sort of wanted to help out a student who's doing a project, and but it just sort of expanded over the next 7 years total it took to make this film. Um, but yeah,
Did you find people, like, not just Ruth, but everyone was kind of accepted to doing your film as well too? I know you had one incident that you did include in the film, which was someone telling you to drop the case. That wasn't Ruth's sister, was it? That was Marina?
that was Marina. Yeah.
Marina.
Well, Marina just I talked to her on the phone, and this is in the film, and I did everything I could to get an interview with her, but people have been trying for 20 years or something to get an interview with Marina, and she hasn't really done one for a long time. I think she's tired of being in the spotlight and being sort of abused by people interviewing her. And there's a lot of probably a lot of people you can't really trust trying to do that. But yeah, she told me, don't waste your life on this. The truth will never come out. And I don't think she meant to drop the case, but she just meant don't spend too much time on this, because people have spent their entire lives on this. I mean, this goes back until back to 1964. It's almost 60 years. And there are people who have been working on it since then. They do other things with their lives too, but I mean, there are a lot of people that their major life's work was investigating the JFK assassination for 20, 30, 40, 50 years of their life. Um, so yeah, personally, I don't want to do that. I might revisit this topic at some point, but um, you know, I have other interests too, and uh, this is an amazing story. I think the general public should know more about it. They should at least, you know, watch some good documentaries or read a book or two about this. But you know, you don't have to become obsessed and read 20 books, or some of these people, they have encyclopedic knowledge of this. You've talked to some of them. It's almost disturbing how much they know about this, all the names, all the dates, all the details, all the documents. Um,
Well, you went to some of these people's homes and you met. I think, where'd you find even the JFK file experts? I know you got Jim on there. I've had Jim on the show. Jim's an encyclopedia of knowledge. Um, whether you agree with him or not, he just has a lot of things in his head that are just, I mean, he's got facts to back it up as well too. I've seen his film as well. And where did you like find all these people? Did you go searching for anybody that might have more information on the Paynes? I know you had one guy on there who had like filing cabinets of like documents that were like, what is it? They were God, what's that thing you put over laminated? They were laminated. And I was like, yeah, like that's what's interesting to me is that when we talk about these experts who've spent their whole lives going into it, I mean, you hear people like it's interesting to see, a kid like yourself interested in the assassination of JFK. Then you get some people that are like, drop it. You don't want to end up like me. Like it's been like, and I get it because I've only been in it like 2 months, but dude, it's consumed my whole life. It's interesting.
it it's extremely interesting. I mean, this this has been called the greatest story in history, or the most complex murder case in history, and I think that's kind of true. I mean, this story is fundamental. It's mythological. And it goes in so many different directions. You can kind of start your political historical education through the JFK assassination. You can start learning about you know Cold War history, and uh, the intelligence community, international relations, left-right politics, all this, stuff, all this amazing, stuff that's important to know as a citizen. So it's not like I'm trying to discourage people from getting into this. It is, yeah, it's an amazing story. That's why I could spend 7 years of my life working on this, because I'm that interested in it, and I think it's that important. Um,
At any moment when she was in her house playing bridge with her friends and you were setting up, you did some great camera shots. I don't know who was in charge of the camera, but bravo, because that was movie quality stuff. When you had like a low angle that was like, I guess, centered right with the table, and she was playing cards with her friends. Did you ask any of them, like, they were talking about like, oh, we haven't had cameras in here before. This is a good day. Someone put their wig on or did something. I'm just curious. Did you ask any of them, like talk to them about it? Any of them want to like maybe do not really an interview on, I guess, on the record, but more of an off air type questioning deal?
yeah, I want to give a shout out to Melissa Langer, my friend who shot that scene. She's an amazing DP. You can look her up. She's done a lot of great work. And yeah, I was considering trying to interview one of Ruth's neighbors there at the retirement home, but I never got around to it, and I felt like maybe that would be a little underhanded to like start talking to people's friends and neighbors about them. What do you really think about Ruth, or have you heard about this, or you know, um, I think I asked some people, but it never happened. Um, but yeah, you get to see Ruth in her life there at the retirement home, um, and yeah, I think it's important to see Ruth as like a human being, no matter what you think she's guilty of, or how innocent or guilty you think she is. She's a human being, and she's been through a lot just by the fact of having her life tied to this event, for all of history, and people, hounding her about it, talking about her, speculating. She's had to bear a pretty heavy burden here. So I salute her for doing that and still being open to talking to people like me. Um,
How many questions did you ask her? And then how many questions didn't make it into the film?
oh, that's a hard one. I don't know how many questions I asked her. A lot, you know, several pages of questions, and a few different interviews, and yeah, a lot of times we went over some of the same stuff. There's basically, there's her story of what actually happened, her experience living with the Oswalds, meeting them, living with Marina, and then the day of the assassination, when she was watching TV with Marina, and then the police came over after the assassination and searched her house, and then you know testifying for the Warren Commission. Um,
Which was confusing to me because she said she asked for a warrant. And it was like this whole like, okay, if you're 100% complicit with the police, like I've heard people say she's just anti-communist, which I can understand, which means like I thought she's just like a patriot, the way that I've heard her talk about her story and everything. But then she would say something like, I told the police officer, do you have a warrant? They're like, no, we can get one though. I was like, she's putting up a little bit of resistance. So she does consider this overstepping the boundary of what she would consider how much she's going to go with. But then she let him in. And I don't really know what happened after that. Like, could you walk me through what she described the day of the assassination for her was?
um, well, she she came home, and she and Marina were watching TV, um, and uh, there was a report came on that the president had been shot. No, um, and then they were just sort of. I mean, there's a lot of details here. There's like the call she gets from her husband, but basically the police come over uh, that afternoon, and there are the police reported that Ruth Paine said, "Oh, we've been expecting you," when they arrived at the house. She denies that, so that's a he said she said situation. But I believe two police officers said that, and yeah, they came in, and Ruth is translating for Marina. With Marina doesn't speak that good of English, and so she's translating to the police, and they asked if he had a gun. Ruth said no, but then Marina says yes, um, and they go to the garage where supposedly this rifle was stored in a blanket, and there's this dramatic scene that Ruth repeats in almost every interview, where the police officer picks up this blanket and it's empty. There's no rifle in it. And this is the moment, when in her mind, she thinks it could have been him, could have been Oswald, could have
But
been
she
Ruth.
said he didn't even own a gun. And I've heard her say in the video on the sixth floor museum or whatever's YouTube channel, she talks about like I know people are thinking, where would he even hide the gun? Because he packed the back of the car or something like that, when they were all moving in or something. And she goes, well, I'd have to assume it will be in those like two long like army bags or military bags that he had, and he stuffed clothes around it. And I'm like, I'm seeing a lot of speculating. That's the one thing I didn't like about the Warren Commission, is that in an official document, they usually say a person's name and they say the job title of that person. Then they go on to why that person was involved, but they start speculating. And I'm like, all right, we writing a book, Stephen King over here. What is going on? But that, like I said, that can get into dangerous territory that we don't need to chart. I'm just curious if she said, I've heard her say she never even knew he owned a gun, but then I've also heard her go the opposite and say, like, I don't know where he would have stored it. I didn't come across it.
Her No, her official position is she didn't know he had a gun, and she would have been upset or wouldn't have allowed him to have one in the house. Um, there is a little controversy with Michael Payne, where he, in 1993, he was doing interviews and he said, "Oh, I saw that picture of Oswald with his rifle. Oswald showed it to me." Um, and he had never said that before. He had never said he saw that photo when all his testimony to the Warren Commission, everything he had said before 93. Uh, and people, people were a little suspicious. Did he make this up? Is he trying to make the story more dramatic, or what? But yeah, there are questions over whether they knew they had even Michael Payne they had even handled this blanket, and Michael Payne thought what was in the blanket was just camping equipment. Um,
Or crib parts, apparently.
um, so yeah, who knows? It's very strange that this blanket is supposedly just sitting on the floor of the garage with a rifle in it. Uh,
Not trying to
but
hide it at all. It's just a regular picnic blanket. What happens if they want to go take a picnic and they come across that? That just doesn't seem like good, proper gun safety that I've learned in, all the films that they make about gun safety. I'm curious when it comes to Michael Payne, was there at that retirement home. And I know that they've been divorced or separated for a good amount of time. Did you think that was suspicious at all? Like that maybe she might have contacted them or they just had been rekindling over the past couple of months or something.
yeah, that was weird when I found that Michael Payne was living at the same retirement home. I think they remained somewhat friendly over the years, and their son was also living in that area of California. So I think maybe it made sense for Michael to be living out there also. He Yeah, he was losing his memory at that point, and I only talked to him for a little bit, and I I felt like I wasn't, going to get much out of him because he was starting to go downhill, and he died in 2018, just a few years later. Um, so that's probably the last time anybody interviewed him.
You did what a lot of people probably wouldn't have done, and that would have been you just cut the interview, like you just like kind of wrapped him up pretty quickly into the doc. Most people would have sat there and hoped that something would have slipped out or he would have forgot to filter or something and hoped to get some information out of it. And that's obviously where people can start throwing criticisms, mostly because that would be like abuse or whatever you want to say. People will say the whole list. And I thought that was, you kept it tight and you could tell, like, I mean, it must've been hard trying to, like, was Ruth Paine 100% like, on the ball on things? I see on some interview stuff, she stutters and people go, she's losing the story. I'm like, yeah, but you're like 90 something years old. Like I'm 24 and there are days I forget what I had for breakfast. Like it's not necessarily, I mean, I get it. You tell it over and over again. Eventually it becomes like, programmed India, but it's not necessarily easy to recount and, be able to think what this person's going to ask you. There's a basic template of questions I could ask you right now, but there's also things I'd rather just talk to you as a person, which you definitely showed in the film. You're just also trying to talk to her and get her, story and her experience.
Yeah. Um, I know a lot of people when they see a film like this, a sort of true crime genre type film where it's the question of whether the main character is guilty or not, or whether they're lying. People are hoping for that conclusive moment where somebody slips or gives a deathbed confession or something, like
Howard Hunt.
yeah, or what's that, Durst, or Robert Durst, the one, that true crime series, I forget what it was called, where he they have this envelope where he spelled something the same way as on the murderer wrote it or something. Have you seen that?
I have not, but it sounds like a what do you call it? What was that killer, the Zodiac killer?
Yeah. But I went into this, thinking I don't expect to get anything like that, and even if you do, people will dismiss it. You know, Even if you get a deathbed confession, like Howard Hunt, a lot of people don't believe that because he was a career liar, CIA agent, and a lot of people say, well, it doesn't really matter what he says. It's not. It's still, you know, it's still hearsay. It doesn't really prove anything. For some people, maybe it does, but for others, you could say, well, he just wanted to, you know, get a little attention or you know, help his son, have some material to make some money off of or something, before he died. Uh,
That's one thing I learned doing at least all the podcasts I've done with experts and people in the field is that I got to understand when do I draw the line. Like I agree with the Warren Commission, I agree with the CT people as well too. I have my own thoughts, but I draw lines on both of them. I think they go a little bit too much where there's like the magic bullet. I can't get down with that. Um, but there are things with conspiracy stuff. Like I don't believe bashing in the president's head to pull bullet fragments out. I don't get that one. I can't go that far. But I've studied the government in the past, Operation Midnight Climax, Watergate, and just Howard Hunt saying in an interview that he would slather LSD on a driver's steering wheel, hoping that it would soak into their hands. Like whether that happened and that was planned or not doesn't matter, but you have people involved in your institution that are thinking like that, which means now the playing field starts to change from the government that to the government that is. I mean, you can say that's conspiratorial, you can say whatever, but it's very, very hard, especially, not to come off with a biased view, which, like I said, you did it perfectly, where there was no bias and nobody even knows listening what your view is on the whole thing. And it gets to this point of when we have, like, I have an expert on and they say something and then they say their book or they say whatever, you got to make sure that the details that are being added and you're being told aren't exactly, I guess, their book. You got to make sure it's historical. It's the record. I think for a lot of people, like I'm in the group of, I don't care what the answer is. I just want there to be no confusion on what the record is. Because if you're like how I was heading into this and you start seeing all the medical evidence and all this type of stuff, you start wondering what the hell is going on. You realize that a high school class that could show you a film of Kennedy being shot necessarily isn't the exact record, but it's the one that's everyone's being told. And that's when you dive down this route and you start getting into all the interesting stuff. And one point I wanted to mention was Vincent Salandria, rest in peace. But you talked to him. What was that like? That had to be an experience because, like, that's like that's in the beginning of your documentary as well, too. It's like right in the front. And then you also, I think, include a little bit throughout.
yeah. So Vince Salandria, he's sort of the godfather of JFK researchers. You know, he was the first person to publish an article critical of the Warren report in 1964, and he's sort of been on the cutting edge of this case ever since. You know, people depends what you what position you take. Some people think he's a nut and he went too far. Other people think that he's always sort of pushed the envelope of understanding the important aspects of the assassination. So, he's somebody very respected, and I really wanted to be able to include him. He's not really as well known as some of the other researchers because he likes to stay out of the spotlight. I think this is the first, big film he's been in. And he was 88, 89 when I interviewed him, and he died just a few years later in 2020 at age 92. Um, his his take on the assassination is important to understand. He he felt that people were too focused on the details. That people got lost in the minutia of the details, the physical evidence, debating, this and that, tiny point. Um, and for him, he said, it was obvious. It was obvious the day it happened. You only have to look at a few simple things to understand this was a conspiracy, and it was a coup d'état. It wasn't the mob. It wasn't the Soviets, the Cubans, right wing oil men in Texas. He says it was the establishment that decided to kill JFK, and so early on he started saying we have to look at why this was done. What did JFK do to raise this much hatred from the establishment, and why did they think it was necessary to take him out? So yeah, I think Vince Landria's analysis is important for people to understand. That's it's not you don't hear it everywhere. A lot of people are just happy to talk about the details all day, or say, who knows, maybe it's this, maybe it's that, and to this day you have people saying that JFK was just another Cold Warrior. There's no good reason that the establishment would have to take him out. I think that's been trashed. Obviously JFK was moving towards peace. He had these back channel, diplomacy with Khrushchev and Castro, the nuclear test ban treaty. His
Well, the three-strike policy would be Bay of Pigs, Cuban Missile Crisis. You can add Operation Northwoods in those. And then you have like Patrice Lumumba. You have scenarios where you have, oh my God, I'm going to blank on his name, Tom Aboya. I mean, Africa incident as well, too. There was a lot of stuff that it was revolutionary for the time period. And it makes it a little bit more difficult because, like, you can ask the who, but the more important question is the why. But much like you said, getting lost with the details. I mean, there are people that are fighting over a bunch of things that think they're going to validate their point. I mean, half the time I see something about JFK trending on a forum and it's about a fucking colored jacket. Like, I get it. Cool, I guess, if you're trying to prove that, but there's plenty of other evidence that are bigger chunks you could look at as well, too. And you do get lost from it too. But I think it's the main question that Vince kind of brings up, which is the deep politics behind it, the deep state, the essential. When you point at a character like people do, Alan Dulles, that's your man. It's like, necessarily, it's probably bigger than that. It probably goes a lot deeper than that as well, too. He can be one, but there could be a whole crucial aspect that you're missing. It's like the president in a sense. You're just looking at a face. You got to look deeper than that as well, too. These things don't just, they start off with just maybe a rogue agent. Sure, we can point at CIA agents that would be rogue. But also you have a whole institution that seems to be doing their darndest, like the Warren Commission, for instance. I bring up, you're investigating the president's death, basically. And what it seemed like to me was you were more happy to be like Oswald's the killer, and there's no doubt about it. You're not even leaving any open room, not for conspiracy, but for any other possible suspects. This seemed like a gunning for one man. And that's what raised my suspicions, was that I've never seen that in an investigation before. And tactics that you could say wouldn't last in court today, you could point out. And I think these are all good things. Like, I'm not 100% jumping on the smoking gun or anything like that. I'm just saying these are things that need to be talked about. They need to be addressed, because I think you stand in the same boat as me, and much like a couple other researchers that I have talked to, which is you just want to get the historical record straight. I mean, it doesn't even really matter about what the answer is. In a sense, we can have our own opinions based on the information that we've got. But if they told me that it was 100% Oswald and documents came out to show it, I'd be like, okay, glad we know. I'm not standing in anybody's way. I just want to make sure that when anybody gets interested in this subject, you got to look at it from multiple angles. One, freeing a person that could be blamed for the murder of a president if he's guilty or if he's innocent. And also look at Marina Oswald. I mean, you had a clip in your film where you talked about her switching her angle on things, and you showed a little news clip of it. Why'd you just start talking about it now? Oh, I thought American government was different. And I was like, well, I'm assuming she's talking about the Russia government, and we're more than happy to think Russia thinks like this. So why can't we think of it as our own? And that to me was a very crucial moment in your film, I thought.
Mhm. Yeah. Marina had gone along with the official story for decades, and then at a certain point in the 80s, late 80s, she switched. I'm not sure exactly what made her switch. She read a book, or somebody, presented her with some other information. But I think it's an important lesson to always be open-minded and willing to revise your own perspective, and willing to admit you were wrong about something, maybe some point of evidence, or some perspective. And it's people just naturally tend to want to see things in black and white, or decide and be sure. That uncertainty is a very uncomfortable place to be. And I mean, I think on one level, it's important to be able to understand evidence and come to a logical conclusion. On the other hand, you always need to, question where you're coming from, or what the opposing views are, and be able to defend your position or take in new information. Um, if you can't do that, then you're just operating on faith. And it's funny that the people on the conspiracy side are accused of operating on faith, when you can just as easily make that argument against people from the official story position. I'd say more easily, a lot more easily.
Did you come across anything or anybody show you anything that either, I wouldn't say changed your view, but was just interesting, like a document maybe that doesn't necessarily have to fit however you're thinking, but you talk to Gerald Posner, you talk to Max Holland, you talk to Ruth Paine, you talk to Michael Payne, you talk to Jim DiEugeno, you talk to so many people. I feel like someone had to at least show you something that you're like, well, this is interesting, or anything that you might have included in the film, or anything that you didn't include in the film.
Somebody gave me a letter Ruth Paine wrote to Jim Garrison, which is very odd. It's not in the film, but she testified at Jim Garrison's case, and she wrote him this letter, sort of offering help to him, and it's weird. It doesn't make that much sense to me, because Ruth has always been strongly pro-official story. I don't understand why she would be offering help to Jim Garrison. I think people can look that up. It's online somewhere. But that's weird.
Yeah.
There's another document I came across myself, just looking through these things. J. Edgar Hoover warning the Warren Commission that they shouldn't let out any of the details about the Paynes, and and the de Mohrenschilds. And then he says, this could have severe repercussions for the commission, and sort of compares it to a situation with Jack Ruby. So it's a weird letter where he's, saying there's something about the Paynes, the de Mohrenschilds, and Jack Ruby that we don't want coming out. Otherwise, there could be severe repercussions.
Is de Mohrenschildt suspicious because he's the one that introduced the Paynes to Oswald?
Well, de Mohrenschildt is a confirmed CIA informant. So it's suspicious that Oswald had sort of his best friend there in Dallas for a while was CIA and was strongly anti-communist. That's another thing where I didn't have the documents, but I when I was making the movie, but since then I came across some of them, HSCA documents where the CIA basically says, oh, yes, he was an unpaid informant. Maybe technically he's not an agent or something, but he's working for them, and he's on friendly terms with the CIA guy there in Dallas, the head of the CIA office there, J. Walton Moore.
Did you think it was suspicious that Ruth Paine talks about Oswald calling the house twice? Because I was like, I thought you only get one phone call when you're in jail.
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't think that was suspicious. There's controversy over that.
There's controversy over everything. Everywhere you step's a freaking spider web of hell.
Yeah, that's, I could see how this could turn off a lot of people, just people who aren't interested in the assassination. Once the complexity of it and the debate back and forth, like it could overwhelm a lot of people. Like, well, this is what one side says, but here's this. Oh, and here's the response to this, and here's the debunking of that. It can be a little bit much, but it's important to understand that for pretty much every major point of the official story, there is a counter argument.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is documented in some way. It's not just some speculation. There is some actual documentary evidence, testimony, government documents to back it up.
When it comes to I don't know if this is conspiracy or not, or just speculation, but they talked about a phone call, and I've heard Ruth mention that she made 2 calls that never went through to someone that Oswald wanted her to contact. Because I've also heard her say that she didn't want to do anything for him, mostly because if he is the person that killed the president, you shouldn't be calling my house. That's how she stated it. So I'm just curious, did you ever ask her about that? Did she ever mention anything about, calling this JD Adams or whoever his name was?
Yeah, there's a little bit of that in the movie. I asked her. She the story is Oswald wanted her to contact a lawyer. The guy's name is John Abt, ABT, and he's sort of well known as somebody who defends communists or something. So she says that she tried to call him and got no answer. So she gave up. Of course, the next day, Oswald's killed by Jack Ruby. So that's the end of that story. But yeah, Ruth she seems resentful that he's asking anything of her at that point. And then when he's killed, she admits that her first reaction was actually some sort of relief that it was over now, and Marina wouldn't have to go through a trial or something. So
So her
it's a
heart
little
went out for
strange.
well, her heart went out for Marina, or did she have relief at the fact that Oswald, who just killed the president and now is in jail, is alive, and now you might be, there's got to be people back then that wanted to go to her house and call her a communist and throw tomatoes or do whatever they do in the movies. I mean, that's a big, big issue. Even after he's dead, there's still that pain that lingers. No pun intended. Pain.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I'm surprised how few people seem to have accused the Paynes, officially uh, accused the Paynes of being accomplices with Oswald. That seems to have been completely ruled out right away, and nobody really talked about it. And yeah, which they seem to get a lot of respect from the authorities when you might think maybe they would consider this strange left-wing upper class couple sort of socialist leaning with a supposed communist living with them. Maybe people might have some doubts about them, but didn't seem to be that way. There's the whole issue of the left right dynamic and the socialist versus communist thing is fascinating to me, and that Ruth's family uh, they were socialists. They supported the Socialist Party candidate Norman Thomas, who was, I think he ran for president many times, but he was a mainstream. People hear the word socialist and they think extremist. This guy was mainstream, kind of democratic socialist type, and he was actually being funded by the CIA at one point. And so her parents supported this guy, but they were very strong anti-communists. People hear socialist, communist, a lot of them equate the two. That's not the case. There are a lot of internal divisions on the left, and so the government was happy to work with some of these people or use them as defense against the more extreme actual communists, and that's kind of how Ruth Paine seems to describe her political view. She's liberal, but she's strongly anti-communist, and so those are the kind of people who might be engaged by the government to work against the communists, or the people who are on the very extreme end of things, who they might think are dangerous.
Radicals. When it comes to the typewriter, what was the essentialness behind that? You had so much information in your documentary. It was really hard to, like, in one take, to be able to consume it all. I'm gonna end up having to watch it again. And when I say having, it doesn't mean I'm being forced. It means I actually enjoy watching it. So I do recommend it to anybody out there listening. It's very, very good. But what was the essentialness of the typewritten note?
Yeah, I recommend people watch this movie more than once. It's packed with information. You can learn more on the second viewing, and then if you're really interested, start reading books or looking up in the forums online about this. There's plenty of stuff that's not even covered in the movie that's still being hashed out, and yeah, I think you can sort of you can be part of this investigation. The typewriter is interesting. This Oswald borrowed Ruth's typewriter to write a letter to the Soviet embassy in DC. And this is just, you know, just a few weeks before the assassination. And so Oswald is typing a letter at Ruth's house on her typewriter, and he sort of, this is from Ruth, what Ruth tells us, he hides what he's writing when she walks by or something, and she gets curious. And then later he leaves his draft, his handwritten draft of this letter on this desk, and Ruth sort of decides to take this draft and read it. I guess her story is she glanced at it and saw something that wasn't true or something, but she obviously she reads this letter. The story is she makes a copy herself. She thinks that it's important, and she decides to give it to the FBI the next time they come out. The FBI came to talk to the Oswalds or get some information a couple times before this. So Ruth, at this point, has a relationship with the FBI agent, and she's decided to wait until he comes by next to give him this letter. So essentially, Ruth Paine is admitting here that she's informing on Oswald to the FBI. And I don't think a lot of people don't really notice that, but that's what happened.
My brain immediately went like the conspiracy route, or it was like Quaker to a point. Like you're not going to touch a blanket or whatever in the garage that might have a possible rifle in it, but then you read somebody else's note, and then next thing you know, you are typing up or doing what. That's just, to me, that's suspicious. Also, what's suspicious is if you look at the 6th floor museum, there's I think it's 2 years old now, maybe 3. Ruth Paine is talking about this, and this is kind of where I've been pulling out all the documentary stuff about Ruth Paine, not just besides yours, but this interview that she was in. And she talked about, they're like, you went to the store when the police showed up at your house to question you and search your home. And she was like, yeah, I don't know what I was thinking. And it was just like, I get if you're in shock, maybe, but also that's like really like, that's very strange. It's very, very comfortable for people. In the beginning, you said that you asked, do they have a warrant? That's not, you don't let any stranger in the way that you're interacting with them. As soon as they show up at the door with that question, do you have a warrant? You're not going to leave the house alone unless you have some type of comfortability. So she got comfortable quick. Obviously, this is where people would say, oh, this, that's you're criticizing, you're slandering. No, I'm just asking questions on things that I don't leave the house unlocked. I'm just saying that's stuff you can question when those types of scenarios happen. It might not just slip your head. I mean, we can say that of shock, but I think it only leads into a lot of information that starts to become hazy as well, too. Mostly because you can speculate a bunch of things at that point. How hard was it for you not to just speculate? I mean, on anything that you were being told, like you probably got to have some thoughts in your head going on when she's answering questions. Like, I mean, were you finding that like your mind was changing, or were you finding that you were like agreeing with her and you actually think that whatever? I'm not trying to get an answer out of you. Obviously, keep it vague if you want, but did you spark up interest in the aspect of maybe you were learning a bunch of information from talking to her and getting a sense of who she was?
Yeah, I was always open to hearing what she had to say along with the other people in the film. There are certain accusations against her that I don't think necessarily hold water. Some of those, I decided to just ignore them. But yeah, I always try to keep an open mind of what what are the possibilities, and I think there's a spectrum of possibilities with Ruth. It's like on the most extreme side, you say she was involved with the planning of the assassination. She was right in there. She knew what the plot was, and her role was to, help set up Oswald as a patsy. And then, on the other side, you're saying there was no conspiracy. And Ruth Paine is obviously, by definition, completely innocent. If there was no conspiracy, she wasn't doing anything, and she wasn't an accomplice. She was exactly what she said she was, a innocent bystander, a do-gooder, just somebody who was helping out the Oswalds. And but in between there's all this nuance. There's like, was she, was she an unwitting, compartmentalized agent of some sort who was doing some job looking after Oswald? She had no idea that the assassination was the master plan. Did she consciously plant evidence? Or was the evidence planted at her house by the FBI and she just found it and thought it was real? Uh, and was she a CIA asset and she didn't know she was an asset? There are all these possibilities. So I think it's important to keep an open mind. Like, we don't.
Did she own a magic garage? I mean, these are plausible questions. I think I get the point where you say like the conspiracy side of things, because they have I don't know if you've heard this. I'm sure you've probably been asked this question before, but there was like speculation about like lesbian stuff on a film. And I'm like, all right, that toss it out the window. That I don't know what that's about, but people speculate this type of stuff with this. I don't know if I'm being crazy, but I've heard that multiple times. I don't know if you've came across any of that type of stuff where I just start going, I don't understand the point in that. I don't know where people are getting that information at, if that's true or not.
Yeah, I've heard about that. It was written in some book, and some researchers have told me about it. With that, it's like, I don't even care if it is true. Does it really make a difference to this case? And it's so like sensationalistic. I don't want to deal with that aspect of it. It's like, who knows? I mean, it might be tantalizing, salacious stuff for some people, but nobody ever showed me the documents, the testimony, anything to back that up. It may exist, but I decided to throw that out. I also think once you start saying things like that, you're going to be dismissed by a lot of people. They're going to say, "Oh, this is trash." They're talking about Ruth Paine as a lesbian. There are people who are trying to debunk my film at this point, and they actually brought that point up, even though it's not in my movie, because it was talked about on one of these podcast interviews I did.
I'm
They're
sorry, I didn't
saying,
mean to mention it.
they're saying, there's even an angle now. They're trying to say that the conspiracy people are homophobic, or something, because of Jim Garrison's case against Clay Shaw, and Clay Shaw was homosexual, and they said throw Ruth Paine into the mix there too. The conspiracy theorists accuse Ruth Paine of being this evil lesbian conspirator, So be careful where you go with this stuff.
Jesus.
Because there are, a lot of people are just waiting to kind of dismiss everything you say if you're not like completely on the official story 100%. And you got to be extra vigilant about the stuff you're talking about and what you're promoting.
When it comes to looking at the comments after the film, and also did you look at and take any advice from any researchers or anybody while you were making your film, like things that they wanted you to ask? I have to feel like if at this point you're probably asking someone for maybe some advice on what you should do for your film while you're making it. Just, I mean, it's never hurts to have a little advice from somebody. And I'm sure plenty of people probably were trying to insert what they would ask, and I'm curious if you took any of their, I guess, criticisms or advice and used it in your film.
Yeah, I was always talking to people, ask them what do you think I should ask her next? And uh, I don't remember the specifics. There, a lot of people have an idea like, oh, I would have pushed her harder on this point, and I would have, you know, you could have asked her about this.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
uh,
Wait till the air gets sucked out of the room when you say something difficult, and then they'll shut up.
well, it's like there are things that I wish I had asked her, but I know how easy it is for her to, you know, to respond to that or to to dismiss it. It's not like people think if you put the magic question to Ruth, she's going to break down and admit something, or be uh, so flustered that you can finally tell it's the smoking gun that she's guilty or something. It's not that simple, and you can see how easy it is for her to just say, "Well, that's not true," or "I didn't do that," or something, or come up with some very believable explanation, or maybe it is the honest explanation.
Or just get up and leave. They don't have to sit there and listen to questions either. Like, people think like it's the same thing with the Freedom of Information Act. Like, I know people use it like, I got this from the Freedom of Information Act. I'm like, they don't have to tell you shit, right? Like, they can just deny your request, say it doesn't exist. It's happened before, and we've known documents to come out 5-10 years after that, and turns out it was real. Like, that's you're asking for something, you're asking permission. It's best to be on their good side when you ask those things. And especially if you're doing an interview with someone, you don't want to ask a hard-hitting question right up front, or something you feel like you have to ask. That's an end question. That's something, if the interview does end here, the only issue that you might deal with is something that might happen after the film gets out there as well too, which is interesting because, like, even with like the psychological tactics you could use, which I've taken psychology, and I've seen her interviews, and usually when she starts like answering a question, she'll cut to something else, like she's also directing the interview a little bit. And then Priscilla was in your film as well too. Rest in peace as well. You kept saying something, and she kept saying unwitting, unwitting, and you're like, no, witting, witting. The document says it right here, witting, and you're like unwitting, and it's like those small things are really, really not noticeable if you're just like having a conversation. But if you're asking questions and you're looking for like a specific answer, if you're trying to know that get the answer to one thing, then when you see the question getting tossed out or skipped over or like brought around a different way, you notice it and you can raise a red flag and stop it. And you did do that in your film too with Priscilla. You showed a document saying, it says it right here, it says it right here. And it kept just going back and forth, which that had to be a little bit difficult as well.
Yeah, that's the interview with Priscilla Johnson Macmillan. Uh, it was a little uncomfortable also. She was very friendly, and she never got offended or flustered or anything, even when I brought up that her, you know, CIA links there. But yeah, I'm always glad when people notice that like witting unwitting exchange, because I also thought that was telling and kind of humorous at the same time. But yeah, Priscilla Johnson Macmillan is another very suspicious character in the story, with her strange coincidence how she was the person to interview Oswald in Russia when he defected and write an article in the paper about it. And then she befriends Marina after the assassination and convinces her to write this book. It's basically going to be Marina's memoir. Uh, and uh, she becomes like best friends with Marina. And this is a person who the CIA, you know, documents show she was a witting collaborator. She was, being debriefed by the CIA when she would come back from Russia. And she applied to work for the CIA in 1952 and was turned down. But we know at least she's on their radar. And obviously the CIA wants certain numbers of people who aren't really on the books, but are just unofficial assets, so they can have plausible deniability in something like this, where even today people are going to, when I bring this stuff up, some people are going to say, well, but she wasn't CIA. She wasn't CIA, as if that, dismisses all the suspicion against her. So, so Priscilla Johnson Macmillan wrote this important book called Marina and Lee in 1977, and went on a big book tour with Marina. They're doing interviews, and at this point, Marina is totally pro official story, and this Priscilla writes this dramatic book that comes out right around the time as the House Select Committee, as a sort of defense of the official story.
I just got one last question for you, and it's a more of a personal one that I thought of. My other ones, I got them off Wikipedia. Just letting you know. No, I'm kidding. But this personal question is: with Marina, did Ruth or did Priscilla talk about what happened like that day afterwards or after Oswald died? Like, was she upset? Was not Ruth, but Marina, was she obviously, I mean, they're married, but what happened with the kids? I mean, you have this, like, I have this gap. What happened to her life? I know I get it. She went on tour with a book later, but that, like, the next week, was she able to stay there for as long as she wanted to? Did she end up having to leave? Did Ruth want her away? Did they set her up and, say, sorry, we have to, I mean, after something like that, it's like being on like a, you go on a road trip with your friends and you hit someone with your car and kill them. Hey man, sorry, we got to cut ways. Like there's a little bit of an exchange that happens where it becomes more painful to keep in contact with this person. It's better just to kind of like go their separate ways.
Yeah, that's what happened, and I think that Marina never stayed at the house again after, a couple nights after the assassination. That was it. She went into federal custody, for her own protection. She was being held at some motel at, Six Flags or something, and so the Secret Service, FBI have her sequestered there, and yeah, I think Ruth says that they only ever saw each other, a couple times after that. And Ruth says that, this thing they shared was this tragedy, this big, the biggest tragedy in their lives, and they just, didn't want to necessarily see each other. I wanted to ask Marina what she thought of Ruth and Priscilla, but she never gave me that clear of an answer about that. I think she's cautious about accusing anybody of anything.
Well, Max, I really appreciate you for giving me your time to be able to chat on my show. Is there a place where people can find your links again? Would you like to say where, if they can find your documentary, your Twitter, any other social media websites that you have?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter and Facebook. The handle is JFK Payne, JFK Paine. Website is jfkpayne.com. And the movie's available Amazon, iTunes, Vimeo, Google Play, a bunch of different places. And we'll be playing at the San Antonio Film Festival August 6th. I'll be down there for that screening. If anybody's in Texas, come out. We'll do a Q&A. And yeah, I hope word spreads about this movie. So far it's an underground thing, but I think it's got the potential to break out, get some more attention.
I'll be watching it again tonight. Thanks everybody for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank podcast. Thanks Max for being on, and we'll see you next episode.